Well, hello, this is my 19th attempt at a video for the review guide for the midterm for professional selling. So hopefully this will work. What I'm going to do is basically just run down the review guide that you have that's connected to this folder and briefly discuss the finer points. Of course, the detail will follow in chronological order to the notes that you have over the course of the last 7 weeks. So, relationship selling, of course, we know is a newer model. Newer in that it's different than the always be closing model, where we're trying to develop a rapport and a relationship actually with our clients and our company and their brand with our brand. That it's long-term in nature and that it's based on trust and it's built on a partnership that's consultative in nature. So it is not just trying to get a sale and being transactional, but it's an attempt to build long-term sales through a relationship, knowing that people don't like to break up with people. The characteristics of a successful seller often, now we know, are someone who not is too extroverted or too introverted, but somewhere in between, which is an ambivert. But still someone that has passion, that's inquisitive, detail-oriented, has intellectual curiosity, enjoys communicating and being with others. All of those enthusiastic seem to be characteristics that most successful sellers have. Selling as a career has advantages and disadvantages. Some of the advantages certainly can be the compensation, the autonomy, the ability to kind of be entrepreneurial in spirit and build your own business, spend the company's money, and travel quite a bit. But for others, traveling is a negative. There's a lot of pressure to sell and competition that can be a negative, as also as the high degree of rejection that occurs. Those are just some examples of the advantages and disadvantages. The law of cause and effect related to selling specifically is, we know the law of cause and effect is for every cause something affects it, an outcome. So if we want to apply that to professional selling, the effect that we would like, the outcome, is a sale, and so we want to find out what causes that, and that would be what other people are doing and try to copy what they're doing. So the law of cause and effect related to selling is find out folks that are doing a really good job at selling that fit your mindset, lens, and style, and mimic, copy, do some of the things that they're doing. The classic sales model and how relationship selling differs. In the classic sales model, the majority of communication is from the seller. Very little is spent on rapport building and needs identification, and most is spent on the close. We can flip that pyramid upside down to relationship selling in the new model, where the majority of communication is listening and through asking questions and building rapport, and very little is spent on the close. The transaction versus truth-based selling is basically, again, the same thing. Transaction, we just want to sell stuff whether they need it or not, and if we tell the truth, great. If we don't, whatever. And truth-based selling is we are absolutely looking for their wants and needs and trying to fit, and if there isn't a fit, we won't sell to them. Ethical selling models, there's really two lenses. Neither is more or less ethical, it's just your point of view. Either the Kantian lens, which is do no harm to all, and the utilitarian, where we do most of the good most of the time to most of the folks. Encoding and decoding, there's that communication model that you should be familiar with, right? And so you should be able to draw the communication model, and on one end we have the seller, who is the sender of the information, and they get a message out through the process of encoding. It goes through some type of a channel that is received by the client through the process of them making sense, which is decoding, knowing that the encoded message is sometimes in the field of experience of the sender, and the decoding is in the field of experience of the receiver, and there's noise that's across the spectrum that makes that perfect match between the encoded and the decoded message perfect. Additionally, the feedback that we're looking for, of course, is ultimately a sale, but it would be a continuation of the relationship. How to overcome communication barriers. There's a bunch of different lists that we had for that. I'll just mention a few. You can make sure that you're having the meeting at the right time of the day. Tuesday mornings, right? We decided are the best, or the statistics has told us that that's the best. We want to take away from any flashiness of ourselves. We want to make sure we're in a room that allows for lack of interruptions and the power is transferred to the individual, not to us. Are some examples. How can we use our voice as a selling tool? Again, a bunch of lists for this one. Just to mention a few, but not all of them. We can use dramatic pauses, silence, articulation, controlling the volume and the speed of our voice are all literary devices that we can use. Characteristics of business markets, which are a little different than consumer markets. Most of the sales professionally that occurs are B2B, not B2C, but there's a good chunk that are still B2C. But the business markets are that they're condensed, that the buying power often is spread amongst different folks, that we have derived demand are some of the characteristics that occur. They have certain selling cycles that occur that are different than in the consumer to the business to consumer market. A needs gap is the difference between the actual state that we exist at and the desired state, knowing that there's always a needs gap, either for an organization or for an individual, and closing that needs gap, well, identifying the needs gap and then closing it is the job of the professional seller. Why we buy, reasons we buy are for a variety of reasons, obviously fulfill a want and need, but really we buy for two reasons. The hedonic, the psychological side, and then we also buy for the functional, the utilitarian side, knowing that many purchases, if not all, most purchases are heavily on the hedonic rather than the utilitarian. How we buy, process, behavior related to decision-making steps. You should be familiar with the 5 decision-making steps and then the corollary of the psychological side that goes along with those. So I'm going to ask the question, what are the 5 steps of the functional side of the buying process, and then the 5 psychological corollaries that go with it. For instance, at the end is evaluation of the purchase. The psychological corollary to that is learning. And at the top end, of course, is needs identification, which is really motivation, right? So you should be able to work through those two things. Creating product solutions, really that's what we sell. We sell a relationship and we sell solutions. We don't sell a product or service. So if we can't convey the solution that our product and service is going to be a part of, it really has no value to the customer. And that's one of our key challenges in a competitive marketplace. A bridge statement is, and I'll combine these next two, an FAB is a feature, advantage, and benefit. And our job is to try to connect the dots and point out things literally to our clients in less words as possible, so we can use a technique called the bridge statement, which takes a key benefit or feature and then links it to what it will do for them. So it takes what it does and then links it to what they get out of it in a sentence, a compound sentence, usually connected by a conjunction of like which means. Body language and selling, we know that 70% of our communication is nonverbal. I gave you a list that you don't need to memorize, but to understand that our body language gives off what we're thinking, and so we need to be attuned to that. And that attunement comes from reading people's body language and adjusting, fine-tuning, adjusting what we need to do based on how their facial expressions, arms folded, relaxed, things are that we can pick up on. The buyer's self-concept and the selling. Each buyer we can kind of lump into 5 categories. 4 categories. You need to know those 4 categories and know a little bit about each one of them in terms of how they're unique, how an intuitor is different than a driver, that is different than someone who's a little bit more social, right? So you need to know those 4 categories and know something about it. Understanding that product knowledge, customer knowledge, and technology and how to use technology combined to those two is an important part because of information parity. We've gone from information asymmetry to information symmetry or parity. And because there's so much information out there, we need to be curators of that information and be able to efficiently and effectively use the data and our time through technologies if necessary. We did some stuff on listening and some techniques to become a better listener, knowing that the majority of our relationship in the beginning is going to be spent on listening. We like them to talk as much as possible, so we have to listen, and we can be active listeners by rephrasing questions, paraphrasing, taking notes, and asking strategic questions. Those are all techniques to become a better listener. You should know the selling cycle in terms of the basic 6 steps that we walk through on a handout, and then to begin with, what is prospecting? Prospecting, we know, is the process of identifying, contacting, and setting up a meeting for individuals for the first time. We get it through a prospecting pool of 4 referrals, orphans, current customers, and leads, and then we can break those into 4 different types. Some are really good. Problem, and the name is escaping me, but people that are positive. I think it's positive was the name, right? And then some that we don't want to be around that are not as good prospects. So you need to know those as well. We want to make sure that in the process of prospecting, we qualify our candidates. Qualifying it means that within the pool or the type of prospect, that they have the money, the authority, and the desire, because we don't want to waste our time. Make sure that we understand that the approach is the first 2-3 minutes. In our case, and maybe a little bit longer in another case, when we meet someone for the first time, that approach should have 4 goals. Gain a positive first impression, get their undivided attention, pique their interest, and transition into the questioning phase. Those questions, of course, should come in a strategic way. When we start with a survey question, we lead to a probing. The probing goes to a confirmation, and then the confirmation goes to the need satisfaction. I missed one there. The first 10 words, of course, in the approach should somehow be thanking them for their time. And then finally, it says chapters 1 through 6 on here. That's a mistake. It should be chapters 1 through 5. Chapters 1 through 5 of the pink text. You should know a little bit about the basic premise and some of the research that's behind each of the chapters and how we're all in the sales, non-selling area, how it's linked to really 3 main industries. And that we then started working through the new the new ABCs, attunement and buoyancy, and then we'll get the clarity after the midterm. Any questions? Email me. Hopefully this links through. Bye.